Hello and welcome to Changing World. My name is Anthony Smith, and today I have a guest who is a naturalist. He's in charge of the Cat Survival Trust, which was set up to provide a refuge to certain endangered species. He's also a conservationist, having spent a lot of time in South America in an effort to protect the rainforests. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Terry Moore. Hello.
Hello, Anthony.
How are you today?
Oh, well, I'm surviving, like most of us. It gets more and more difficult by the day with all the pressures that are forced upon us by the governments and the way that the planet works. Yeah,
I do take your point. Now, we did talk earlier, Terry, didn't we? And I've just wanted to get on to let the viewer know what we're going to be talking about today. Now, one hot topic is these smart meters, which are being rolled out all over the country. There's been a lot of bad press about these, and for good reason. And I'd just like to make a point here that since August 2018, there have been 3,000 households which have had major problems with these new smart meters installed. What's your take on this, Terry?
Well, of course, smart meters are used not just in this country, but throughout Europe and America.
Right.
America started using smart meters before we did, and their experience is horrendous. I mean, they have had so many of these smart meters catch fire and had their houses burnt down. They're very poorly constructed. They work on kVA rather than kilowatts, and everyone is assured that they're going to still be charged in kilowatts, but a lot of people are complaining that their bills have shot up, and yet the whole idea of them is so you can monitor the amount of electricity you use in order to try and cut your bills. This is all very well, but most meters are hidden away in a box outside the house, in a cellar, in a cupboard, and to access them, to sort of look at them on a daily basis, it is totally ridiculous. I mean, we have no time to do all these extra things just to save a couple of kilowatts.
Yes, I do take your point. I mean, it does seem a little bit ludicrous that someone would have to keep, every 5 minutes looking at their little readout and seeing how much electricity they're using. One point I would like to make on this is that, to be honest, the things that consume the most power are quite often the things that we really do need to use. I mean, for example, you switch your oven on to cook your food. The oven uses a high wattage. There's one thing. You can't really say to people, cut down on cooking your food. I mean, we cook our food when we want cooked food. Another thing is the electric kettle. That uses a high wattage as well. You can't really say to people, don't switch your kettle on so often, because they generally switch their kettle on when they want a nice hot drink. So it's things like this, and I could go on. I mean, ironing, the iron, again, is an example of something that uses a lot of electricity. But to say to someone, don't iron your clothes, so that you can save money, well, I don't think that will wash with people. So we've got to get it into perspective. Is it really any advantage? Is there any advantage there for the end user?
Well, of course. I mean, some people use an immersion heater. Some people use night store heaters. Some people rely on electric heating, particularly if they're in an area where they can't get gas. Or don't have any other alternative means of heating their homes. I suppose you could argue that having got one of these meters, you might perhaps turn your thermostat down a couple of degrees. But the trouble is, we're humans, we like our comfort.
Yeah.
And trying to, if you become used to 20 degrees, 18 degrees, whatever it is that you've got used to, it's very difficult to change something that you've done for years.
Yeah.
Certainly, I suppose you could set your timer so that you aren't using as much power perhaps when you're at work or when you're in bed. But, these things are not going to produce the savings that they're all saying, because unfortunately these smart meters don't always work very well, and sometimes they record more consumption than you've actually had previously with an analog meter.
Right. Yeah. So there is an issue which has been noted by certain people who've recently had a smart meter fitted, is that the bill was way out of line with their usage, and they had to, obviously ring up the supplier, complain about it, and get it all redone, and get a new bill sent out. But surely that's more hassle and more trouble than it's worth, isn't it?
Oh, ultimately, getting someone out to check the meter and to change it for yet another one. I mean, this is all supposed to save labour costs. But the problem is, ultimately, what they're looking at is to cut down the number of meter readers so that their overhead costs aren't nearly as much, they make more profit. Well, this is all very well, but if you look at all the corporate companies that are looking to use robots and automated systems to replace humans, you get to a point ultimately where there are so fewer people working, earning money, that there's so fewer people to actually buy the electricity, to buy the products that are made by robots. So, they're basically heading for a situation worldwide where they're running out of customers.
Well, yes, I mean, I do take your point, Terry, because it seems that, the bills all constantly keep creeping up, and not to mention all the other financial burdens like the council tax and, all these other things which a household has to fork out for. So it seems to me there'll come a time when people simply can't afford all this, and what are they going to do when that happens?
Well, certainly don't get me started on council tax. That's a whole podcast on its own.
Right.
So, but there are other issues with these meters. They produce an EMF because they transmit signals all the time to record the amount of electricity you're using at any time of the day. This is perhaps very helpful to the electricity producer because they can adjust their generation perhaps a little bit better, so there isn't quite so much waste. But the whole point is, by actually enabling them to know when you're switching on the kettle and the hairdryer and the iron and all the rest of it, they actually are gathering information about what you're doing in your home every minute of the day, which is very intrusive.
It does seem, we can't really seem to understand the reason for that, other than could it be some kind of, Big Brother monitoring? I mean, what's the point? Why does it need to be monitored to that degree?
I mean, it's even got to the point where it's reported that they can work out from your consumption when you leave for work, when you return home. Now, this is very intrusive information, and if it got into the wrong hands, if someone tapped into the data that's flying around in the air, this is just opening your home to burglary.
Right. Well, I have noted there have been a few security risks, which certain experts have postulated that these machines, because they're a much more developed technology, they could even be prone to hacking. So obviously, because we're dealing with digital information rather than analog. The old meters are, of course, analog, which just have a dial that turns round. These meters are digital, and of course that digital information could go anywhere potentially, couldn't it?
Absolutely. And of course, even if you work for the electric company, we know that employees of various companies have used data that they've gathered while at work and either sold it on or used it to make money for themselves.
Really? Yeah. So, I mean, Terry, the thing is, I think people are beginning to understand that, perhaps this type of technology is not in their best interests, and a lot of people may have reservations about having these meters fitted, especially since there's been a lot of bad press, and that's something that is very hard to ignore. So, what would your solution be to all this? I mean, my thinking is that, as I said to you one time before, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I mean, I'm a firm believer in, if something's running fine, why interfere with it? And so I'd be happy just to keep my meter as it is, and not have any new meter fitted or any tampering with that. What's your view on this, Terry?
Well, because the irony is that so many people are in a bad reception area. We actually have 2 meters here, both analog, and they've been and tried to, in the early days, they tried to fit these smart meters. One is in the cellar and one is right inside a massive building which has got lots of metal structure. And when they fitted them, they found they didn't get a signal.
Really?
Gone through all the trouble of coming and fitting them,
yeah,
they discovered that they had to put the old analog one back. Now that's the same for a lot of people.
Yeah.
A tremendous number of people don't have sufficient signal to send the data and receive data.
Yeah.
There are certain people that would be very lucky and probably won't be able to have them. If you are in a place where the signal, the mobile signal is sufficient, then one advice is, when they send you a letter to say they're coming to fit one,
yeah,
just say, well, look at the press, go on to YouTube, look at all the reports on YouTube of people who've had tremendous trouble with these, including harmful health problems. I mean, there's a big question mark over the EMF that's emitted by these. Some people are complaining that they're getting whistling in their ears and all sorts of problems.
Yeah, yeah.
So we're talking about health problems as well as everything else.
Yeah, I mean, that's just seems crazy to have something in your own home which is potentially going to interfere with your health. I have heard similar reports that certain people have suffered from insomnia since they had the meter fitted. So, surely these things need to be completely ironed out before they start rolling these things out. But there again, it's one of these things that can be very difficult to prove, isn't it, Terry?
I mean, I have heard of some people who've had these fitted, and they put some tin foil over the smart meter so it can't actually transmit the signal.
All right.
Because they're so fed up with them, and that then of course screens them from the EMF that they produce.
Yeah. Well, I dare say if it does come to that, people will do that. But I think before that happens, I think people have got to be aware of these negative aspects of the whole thing, and think, do they really need one?
Well, I can't really honestly see any benefit. You know, it's probably initially a very good idea, but the cost to jobs and the cost to potential health of users and so on, and as I say, with the fire risk, there's so many of them catching fire. In many countries, you know, in all the countries they've been using them, I really think they've got to think this one through again before they even fit any more.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it does seem to be a mounting evidence that obviously these things need to be looked at in more depth. But I mean, all we're told is that you know, fit a smart meter and you'll be able to monitor your bills and help save money. But as I think I made clear earlier on, people have their own usage habits, and it's very unlikely that they're suddenly going to change those usage habits, because we like our comforts. You know, we like having our heating, we like using a kettle because it gives us a hot drink. I don't see that people are miraculously going to cut down on any of these usages, and that for that reason I can't see that this is really a major step forward.
I think the other thing, it's a bit like every issue that we face currently. You know, if the health service were to give us better advice on how to look after ourselves, that would cut back all the number of people who go to hospital.
Yep.
It's like the smart meters. If all the electricity companies sent out a letter and perhaps even offered to send people round to your homes and said, look, if you reduce your heating by a couple of degrees, you will save a lot of money, which will give you money to buy other things. If, for instance, what you can do, when you boil a kettle, get a flask, and any excess water that you have in your kettle, put it in the flask to have a cup of tea a bit later.
Yeah.
I, as you know, I do a lot of conservation work in Argentina, and
right.
I tell you that the Argentines have got this particular trick to a fine art. When they boil up a kettle, they have their flasks, they fill them up, and so they only boil the kettle once.
I see.
I mean, it's simple things like that, which will save money. You know, if you put your iron on to iron some clothes, get all your clothes ready before you start. Don't sort of get halfway through and then go to the room next door, or step and answer the phone, leaving the iron on. I mean, these are very simple things that can reduce your bill just by acting responsibly.
Yeah. I mean, to a certain extent, it's just common sense, isn't it? Really. But I think, you know, let's give the consumer some credit, and let's say that they already act in that manner to a certain extent. That most people, I think, if they're out of a room for long enough, they would turn off the light. And you know, obviously, if they're not going to be in the house all day, then they're not going to leave the heating on. So, you know, I think we've got to give people a certain amount of credit to say that they're within reason. They're already doing a certain amount of endeavouring to cut the bill. So you know, the only question is, will these smart meters really save people money? And my answer to that would be, I think it's quite doubtful.
I think it's very doubtful. It would be much better, as I say, to advise people to get LED lighting. I mean, I've got a couple of rooms which have an LED light in.
Yep.
As you walk into that room, the light switches on.
Yep.
And when you come out of the room, it switches off. And you know, it's got a built-in sensor.
Yep.
I don't have to think about switching it on and off. And that sort of thing, you know, in the garage or whatever, where you're not going to be in a room for very long, these automated devices, not only do the LED lights use considerably power, but they switch themselves on when you're there.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that's a wonderful idea, because it just means that you're just guaranteed not to leave the lights on accidentally, and I think that probably will catch on.
Oh, I'm sure it will.
Yeah.
People need to be advised of what they can actually buy.
Exactly. I mean, the good news is, of course, that a lot of manufacturers have spotted this trend, and that for that reason they have, over the past decade, I would say, been producing items which do use less electricity. For example, we now have these LED TVs, which are much more power efficient than the old cathode ray tube models of 20 years or so ago. So there are, obviously the manufacturers as a whole do accept that power saving is, quite a high priority, and they have been manufacturing items which consume less power generally. So I think that's a very good thing. But obviously the end user has to take a certain amount of initiative in order to make sure that they're not consuming more power than they should be. But having said that, of course, we all like our home comforts, and I think it's unlikely that people are going to drastically change their habits, myself, and so that's my opinion. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Terry?
No, I think that covers the smart meters pretty well.
Right. Well, okay. Well, thank you very much for joining me today, Terry. Now, I think we'll move on to a different topic now, shall we?
Yeah.
I know that you're a keen naturalist, and you're interested in conservation, obviously, and obviously on a larger scale, you're interested in what's happening to the planet. So I thought today we would deal with the subject of climate change, because I know that you've got a lot of information which you'd like to get out, in the public eye, and educate people as to what this is really all about. So what would be your initial take on this subject, the subject of climate change?
Well, we are seeing over the past few years a massive increase in the number of extreme climate events. As you may remember, back in the early 90s, I believe you were at a number of the talks I gave.
Was it the London School of Economics?
That's right, yes.
Yes, I remember that. Yeah.
I think you attended some of my talks there.
I think I probably did. Yes, that was some time ago, wasn't it, Terry?
Yeah. Anyway, the whole upshot of this is that one of the talks I gave there was about the problems of climate. And it's a subject I've been very keen on studying ever since. In fact, here at the charity, we've now had 55 talks, many of which look at the consequences of climate change, not only on humans, but their effect on wildlife and the support system, our planet, that we all rely on.
Right.
And sadly, what we've been experiencing, particularly in the past 16 years, is a huge increase in the extreme weather events that many countries are now suffering on a regular basis. Yes,
it's been very noticeable when you watch the news to see so many tragedies of natural disasters, of hurricanes, just decimating a particular town or region. And recently, of course, we've had these huge wildfires out in California, which have absolutely destroyed towns and people's homes out there. So yeah, it's certainly something that you notice going on all the time somewhere around the globe, don't you?
And the trouble is, the media aren't covering all of these events. If it's an area where perhaps the British go for holidays and whatever, and they can't really hide it, if it's a really major event, they tend to cover it, like the problem we've had in Alaska with this earthquake. If it's got into the world news, then the British media end up covering it. But I would say, on average, we probably get the British media covering about 3% of the major extreme weather events that are happening on our planet.
Well, that's a shocking statistic. I mean, obviously, I suppose if they did cover every single thing, you'd be you'd literally have a program which was running 24 hours a day, I suppose, because the world is obviously a very big place and there's always something going on. So, what is the major aspect of all this that you'd like to get across to the general public, Terry?
Well, to give you an example, last month, November,
yeah,
we've had major climate events, droughts, floods, landslides, mudslides, massive snowstorms. In the USA, we've had that horrendous problem with the fires in California.
Yeah.
But there's been fires in Florida just a couple of days ago, fires in Texas. We've had massive floods. Currently, the northern states more snow than they've ever recorded at this time of the year. Trinidad and Tobago was hit with a massive flood. We've had floods that have had vehicles floating down the streets.
Yeah.
In France, Germany, Spain, Italy, Croatia, Turkey, Philippines, Vietnam, India, China, Russia, Algeria, and even in Argentina, where we have our reserve in northeast Argentina, they've had massive floods. And believe it or not, in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, they've had cars floating down the streets in major towns, and the deserts have become lakes.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah. But none of this, very little of this, is ever shown on British TV.
Right. So there's a lot going on, obviously, that we're not told about for one reason or another. So where is this all leading, Terry? I mean, is it a trend which you seem to be indicating that this trend is continuing, and what will be the consequences of this in the future, do you think, Terry?
Well, they reckon currently that over 400 million people have, in the past few years, lost their homes.
Really?
We're not talking about small numbers.
No.
Now, they lose their homes. Now, you would think that governments around the world would forewarn their populations that this is getting to be a problem and is an increasing problem, and that they would give people advice on just exactly what they should do to try and reduce the effects. Now, you imagine these people who've had their homes washed away or burnt to the ground, if they haven't made sure that their important documents are safe, they will have lost all their identity. So their insurance documents, if they can't remember who it was that they insured with, how are they going to get compensation? If they haven't secured a safe place for their driving license, their birth certificate, their marriage certificate, their passport, they have lost everything that they ever had.
Yeah.
They won't have any money, and how on earth are they going to prove who they are it's not just the money, it's the time to actually prove that you are who you say you are.
Yeah, exactly.
Governments should warn us to keep our critical documents in waterproof and fireproof containers, and to make sure that we can grab them if we are involved in these events.
Well, yes, I mean, there is a certain amount of common sense involved that people need to take the initiative in that respect. But as I say, the only problem is, of course, that these catastrophic events can sometimes take people by surprise, can't they?
Exactly. I mean, these are happening in areas where they've never happened before.
Right.
If you just put in, say, France flooding, just an example, on YouTube or just as a search, up will come hundreds of people's videos that they've been filming when these events are happening.
Yeah.
And we're not, we're talking about cars floating down streets. We're not talking about half an inch of rain. We're talking about a month's worth of rain in 2 or 3 hours.
That's right. And of course, it's not just happening in the developed countries; it's happening in the underdeveloped countries as well. So the people out in India or, for example, Philippines, who are, obviously not wealthy people, they've often lost everything and been forced to live in tents.
And the trouble is, when you get these floods in particular, all the sewage, all the chemicals in the surrounding area get all washed into the water. This then creates a phenomenal amount of additional disease.
Yeah.
So they've then got that to cope with as well in a country, particularly with these third world countries, where they don't have the infrastructure to deal with it.
That's right. Yeah. So, I mean, Terry, do you think this is, would you describe this as cyclical in nature, or do you think it's a trend? I mean, globally, what do you think is happening to the planet? We know the ice caps are melting. That's been documented, but do you think that it's all connected with the fact that this has set off some kind of triggered a reaction in the global ecosystem, which is going to affect us for possibly hundreds of years into the future?
Well, because the interesting thing here is that the IPCC, the Independent Panel for Climate Change, who received massive funding from governments to tell us that it's our fault that we're producing carbon dioxide, which is warming the planet. Well, let's face it, in some areas, each year there are record at the moment there's a record high temperature in parts of Australia, while another part of Australia has got record floods. And in another part, they've also got record snow. So in one area alone, you've got 3 extremes, which are all record. Now, in addition to these crazy weather events, some people are saying it's cyclical. It's to do with the lack of power that's coming from the sun. And they say this is part of the cycle. But if it's the lack of power coming from the sun, how come we've got record high temperatures in some areas and record low temperatures in others? Earlier this year, they had such a record low temperature in Siberia. Wild animals were freezing on the spot, and a lot of farm animals froze because they just couldn't keep buildings warm enough to stop them freezing. And this is getting to be something that's becoming common. So how can carbon dioxide in the atmosphere be causing this? How can the lack of power from the sun be causing this? But then you look at the other things that are happening.
Right.
How come their argument is that climate change and all these things that are happening are due to us? Well, I don't think a little bit of extra carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is causing the huge increase in volcanic eruptions. 16 years ago, we had an average of 3 volcanic eruptions every month. Now we're getting up to 70, sometimes even more every month. And a lot of volcanoes that have been inactive for hundreds of years have suddenly come alive. I don't blame carbon dioxide on that.
Right.
And you look at earthquakes. 16 years ago, there were an average of 200 earthquakes over 2.5 on the Richter scale. Some months now we're getting up to 3,000 earthquakes every month over 2.5 on the Richter scale. You certainly can't blame the car exhausts on that. So there's obviously something really dramatic going on our planet. Now, one of the talks I gave back in the early 90s, and I believe you were there.
I could well have been.
It was about pole shift.
Right, yes. There was a book written about this, which I believe I have a copy, by John White, I believe.
There are a lot of books written about it.
Right.
Now, my talk was to do with the reason that pole shifts happen. Now, pole shifts don't happen very often on this planet. They happen pretty regularly on the sun. But on this planet, they average between 300 and 600,000 years before the next one happens. And unfortunately, we're well overdue for one.
All right.
Now, if you go to the NOAA site, which is a very scientific, very, very well-respected site, you will see that the magnetic north has already moved more than 600 miles. It's moved from its original position towards Siberia.
Is that right? Yeah.
Now, the question here is, what is this actually doing? The magnetic north and the true north, the north that's generated by the core of the planet, are now in different places.
Right.
In actual fact, if you look at the science behind this, what happens is that the core is a massive magnet with immense power, and after many hundreds of thousands of years, it impregnates north into the crust. Unfortunately, as everyone knows from school days, two norths don't get on. And it gets to a tipping point where the two norths start to repel each other. And that's what started 15, 16 years ago. And it's been proven by NOAA with all their scientific data that it has moved, the magnetic north has moved over 600 miles. In effect, North America, the crust, is now slashed with the equator. Now, this is upsetting ocean. It's upsetting the position of the jet stream, and this is the main cause for climate change. Originally, we were very lucky on this planet. We had a band of trees around the Amazon, around Central Africa, and in Indonesia and Philippines. Now, it's bad enough that we've cut so many of these trees down, but as you can imagine, as the crust is slipping, all the trees in the Amazon that are left are now moving south. All the trees in Indonesia and Philippines are moving north.
Mm.
Historically, the trees around the tropics used to soak up all the radiation from the sun, and whatever moisture was absorbed from the ocean was retained by the fact that trees evaporate moisture in the morning, deceive the clouds, to drop what massive rain, which is why it's called rainforest, onto the rainforest in the afternoon. As the trees are moving away, and as we cut more trees down, we haven't got global warming, but we've certainly got an increase in temperature around the tropics.
Uh-huh.
The effect of that is that more moisture is absorbed from the oceans, because as oceans warm up, they release more moisture, producing more cloud, and the cloud is much denser than it used to be. Hence, look at all the massive flooding they've had in the Caribbean, in southern states of America, which has increased year by year since this started.
Yes.
What we're now getting as more and more trees are moving away from the tropics is all that extra cloud is not needed by the trees anymore. It's escaping north and south, producing additional flooding and increased flooding every year as time goes on.
Right, Terry. Well, that is an interesting theorem that you've put forward. Now, just going back in time a little bit, wasn't there quite a lot of publicity, quite even going back into the 70s or the 80s, that there was this worry that sea levels might rise and this could cause all sorts of catastrophic effects globally. What's your take on that? I mean, where does that leave us?
That's a very good question. And yes, in some areas there has been sea level rise. In some areas, the sea level has actually fallen.
Ah.
Now, this goes back to the question of the crust slipping. If your listeners just go onto the internet and, for instance, put in a question, is sea level rising in Florida? You'll come up with all sorts of articles and videos which show that over the past 16 years, more and more salt water is up the drains into the streets in Miami, and it increases every year. However, if you look at other areas of the world, for instance, if you were to look at is there sea level rise in ships, you'll find that sea level is actually going down slightly. So what's actually happening here? Well, it's very easy to explain. Any area of the planet that's approaching the equator because of this pole shift, because of the crustal slippage, any area that's moving towards the tropics is moving towards a bulge of ocean that's pulled out by the effect of the sun and moon oscillating backwards and forwards across the tropics. So inevitably, any area that's moving towards that bulge of ocean is actually losing coastline. In fact, the Florida Keys have had such a high rise in sea level, the salt water's got into the ground and all the trees have died because of the salt water. So yes, we have had sea level rise, but only for the areas moving towards the equator.
Oh, right.
If you look at Australia, Australia, the north side of Australia, if you do research there, you'll find that there's such huge coastal erosion because that is moving towards this bulge of ocean, and they're losing coastline as Australia approaches the equator. Exactly the same reason. With that higher amount of water in the oceans near the equator, they're inevitably going to see sea level rise.
Okay, Terry. Well, that is certainly interesting. What would you say? Is there anything that we can do collectively to help the situation and stop it from getting any worse? Is it beyond our control, or is there anything you think the general public can do to help it?
Well, I'm afraid there's nothing we can do about the pole shift. What we should be looking at very carefully is if you're living near a river, if you're living on a coast and your home is low-lying, as this exposure increases, you are at much greater risk of being one of those people that's going to be hit by the increase in extreme weather events. Now, obviously, it's difficult if you are in one of those areas. If you sell, do you tell your potential buyer why you're moving? It's a very difficult ethical point. But the point is, we have given advice to a number of people who've been in vulnerable areas, and they have moved. If you look at Florida, just go onto the local papers that you can read on the internet, and you'll find that house prices in Florida have totally collapsed.
Is that right?
And that's because everyone is getting out. I personally know of many people who have moved. In fact, ironically, it was now 9 years ago that one of my very close friends who lived in Florida moved up to the borders with Canada. And he thought he was doing really well there, but now he's being hit with massive snowstorms, which are now record snowstorms, and they increase year by year. So he made a good move to avoid the floods, but now he's suffering from massive snowstorms. And of course, with that, you get power cuts, you get isolation, you can't get out to get food and supplies. But with that, he's actually stocking up with food and batteries and all that sort of thing. So he has actually still won, and his house, the one he sold, is now so badly flooded that the footings have rotted, and I'm afraid the person who bought his house is now facing demolition of the house.
Yep. Well, that's yes, that's certainly a shame that these things are happening to people, and of course they can't always predict what's going to happen. Sometimes it's just pot luck. But what would your advice be to people living in more extreme places then? Do you think it's going to get worse for them, or do you think that there is a limit, and if they can survive now, then they'll be all right to survive in the future?
I have to say that people living in the UK are much better placed than many areas of the planet. We have the benefit of the Gulf Stream. By the time these extreme heavy clouds reach us, they've dropped most of their rain on the Caribbean, on the east coast of America. We still get flooding, and we'll still get more flooding as time goes on.
Yeah.
But I'm afraid areas, particularly like America, particularly like China, India, Vietnam, and ironically, the Arabian states, for some peculiar reason, the way the wind direction is changing, the way the ocean currents are changing, a lot of that generated moisture that comes up from the Indian Ocean and around the east coast of Africa is leaking up into the Arabian states because of this movement. So those areas will see increased flooding, increased extreme weather events. It's difficult to say just exactly where one should go. Certain areas of Africa have had massive flooding, with cars skating down the streets and buildings washed away. I mean, ironically, of course, South Africa suffered for many years from droughts. They were having real problems with growing food.
Yeah.
And then they had a massive flood, and now they've got snow at this very moment.
Right.
So it's very difficult to predict just exactly what this pole shift is going to do in terms of altering localized weather events. Poor old Australia, they've had droughts for so long because they're moving towards the equator. They've had to kill, I think, 40% of their livestock because they didn't grow enough forage for them to feed them for the next year.
Well, that's very sad. Yeah.
Worldwide, food production is really being badly hit.
Yeah.
Many countries that used to export quite large amounts of food are now becoming net importers of food because they're not even growing enough for their own people.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this could be a trend which is affecting many countries, and it's difficult to see what the solution would be really, because if your crops are gone, then you've no choice but to import, and that's going to cost more money. So it's obviously going to hit the poorer countries the worst. But as you say, the UK hasn't been too bad up to now. Of course, there is the Brexit scenario, which is a bit of a worry. What the outcome to all that will be. But the good news is that we do have an agricultural industry in this country, which has been quite reliable, hasn't it?
It's been reliable, but we do import a lot of food. So bear in mind that a lot of our fruit and veg comes from the Mediterranean, a lot of our veg comes from Spain. They've had falling production because of the flooding they've had.
Right.
We are going to see some increases in prices on food by the end of this year. I mean, we've already seen packages of food are smaller for the same price.
Oh yes, yes, that's a technique which the companies use a lot, don't they? Reducing the amount.
I mean, they've taken another 5 grams off potato crisps.
Have they?
Yeah, they used to be 40 gram, now they're 35. But of course, there's not even one potato in a bag of crisps. If you take a bag of crisps and crush it,
yep,
you're lucky to get the size of a sugar cube in solid material. So I'm afraid, some of these products that we buy are not really very good value for money.
No, that's true. I suppose the only solution is really to try and buy bulk in certain circumstances. I mean, you could buy things that keep for a long time. For example, a bag of rice or chickpeas or some kind of beans. If you buy them in bulk, then you probably will save. But there again, it goes back to convenience, doesn't it, Terry? Because we tend to like our portions to a standard size. You open a tin of beans and that seems to be about right, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, if you do have some spare beans, you can get these covers for the tins and put it in the fridge ready for the next day. You don't have to eat the whole can if you're a single person. It's not an idea to buy a small can because you're paying through the nose for
Yep.
a smaller quantity.
That's right. So, Terry, let's just sum up. What practical measures do you think people should do about all of this? I mean, is there any recommendation that you have that is generally going to help people out there?
With the climate change, you mean?
Yeah.
I mean, certainly make sure all your critical documents in waterproof and fireproof containers.
Right.
If you do live near a river or low-lying on the coast, seriously consider moving to somewhere higher and in an area where you're not going to get flooding.
Yeah.
Or certainly don't move to an area next to a massive forest, because potentially we're going to see far more forest fires in the future than we've ever seen before. I mean, look at Finland and whatever this year. It's just unheard of that areas are getting massive forest fires.
Yeah.
Italy, with the massive storm they had, a huge area of trees were just knocked flat. Just go on the internet and look at Italy's forest loss.
Mm.
A number of videos show that. I mean, we are facing some pretty horrendous climate changes. So very seriously look at where you live. If you have got woodland next to you and it gets too dry, seriously consider spraying the ground between that forest and your home, just in case. You know, if it looks like there's a possibility of fire, be proactive. Don't just wait and hope it's not going to happen. So there are lots of things you can be proactive about, lots of things you can minimise the risk, and just think it through, because losing your home is not something I would recommend anyone suffer.
Sure. That's obviously an important point, and I suppose another recommendation would be to use non-flammable materials when you're building a new home, because that obviously is a major point. If it's highly flammable, then you're taking a risk.
Sadly, what do the Americans do? They build most of their homes in wood.
Yeah.
So when they have to have them burnt down, what do? They get more timber from the Amazon to rebuild. And that just escalates the problem.
I see. Yeah, I suppose it all depends on what resources are available in that particular country. I mean, we're lucky that we have a lot of quarrying, and we have a lot of stone, and obviously there's a lot of cement manufacturers who can make concrete and brick and things like that. But yeah, I mean, that's a major consideration, that whatever you make your home out of can, make or break when it comes to one of these catastrophes.
Oh, if you've got a ground fire, and you've got a brick or a block building with non-flammable materials, you've only to spray your front door and whatever to that catch the fire. If it's all wood, you've got no chance.
Yeah. Okay, Terry. Right. Well, thank you very much for being present today to give us this information. And if people want to kind of do their own research, are there any particular websites or links that you would recommend to them?
Well, there are some very good people on YouTube who actually give a running commentary of what's happening day by day.
Right.
And they give warnings in a lot of their commentaries on what potentially could happen in the next few weeks ahead. If you research on YouTube people like the Ice Age Farmer, there's the Oppenheimer Ranch Project, there's Adapt 2030, there's the Evolutionary Energy Arts, there's World of Signs. Now, World of Signs, and there's World of Signs Nared King, Naredking. Both of those, search the internet for all the weather-related news, because let's face it, virtually all the television channels around the world are now broadcast on the internet. Now, those people, and also SOTT, which is short for Signs of the Times, SOTT, they extract all the extreme weather events that are happening worldwide, and they do compilations. And that really wakes people up, because when you see massive floods, fires, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, none of which are being shown on the British media, it really makes you think about what you should be doing as an individual to minimise your exposure to some of these events.
That's right, Terry. And at the same time, I suppose, we should also be aware of not wanting to, exacerbate the situation by, with more pollution or doing something which would be counterproductive. So I think it's important. You perhaps would like to say a bit about environmental pollution and how we can perhaps keep that to a minimum. I know we did talk previously about this, about the problem with plastic in the environment and how that's become a massive polluter out there. What would you like to say on that topic?
I think, to be honest, the pollution problem that we all face is so complex, it's almost a subject on its own. But what I would like to say is that we're not just talking about plastic pollution. That in itself is a massive problem. It's generated by the fact that we rely heavily on plastic for just about everything we buy.
Right.
And the big problem here is, of course, if we didn't use oil, we wouldn't be able to travel, we wouldn't be able to transport food and goods around the world, we wouldn't have a source of energy to produce electricity, and we would still be in the Dark Ages. So it's all very well people complaining about the use of oil, but let's face it, we wouldn't be able to do anything without it. It produces plastics, it produces clothing, it produces medicines. Mind you, some of the medicines I wouldn't even consider taking.
No.
But with pollution, it's what we do with the product while we're making the chemicals, while we're making the products, and what we do with the waste.
Right.
And it's a difficult subject when you extract oil. Now, around the coast of the Caribbean, particularly on the coast of Florida, where because of the circulation, it's throwing the water in the Caribbean in a clockwise direction, hitting Florida and Louisiana. And what we're seeing now are millions of marine animals dying because of the pollution from all the leaking oil wells that were producing oil in the Caribbean. But of course, what actually happened was originally the pipe that went in to extract the oil, because of the huge flow of oil, those holes enlarged, and then most of the oil was leaking into the sea, the Caribbean Sea. That then is polluting all the fish. It's reducing the amount of oxygen available, and millions are being washed up along the shores, particularly along Louisiana and the west coast of Florida. And you just put in a search for marine life dying around the Caribbean, and you'll see it. I mean, we're talking about horrendous numbers.
Yeah.
If we're going to continue to extract oil, we need to do it in a responsible, ethical way.
Yeah.
That's unfortunately what the oil companies aren't doing. You know, they just want to make as much profit as they can quickly.
Right.
And not being responsible. So you get all these oil spills on land, you get oil spills in the sea, you get tankers that really shouldn't, they're past their use-by date, and they leak oil all over the place. So we're not just talking about the plastics that are produced from the oil. We're talking about chemicals from chemical factories leaking into rivers, killing all the fish, poisoning the water that people are drinking. So this whole question of pollution is a massive subject.
Yes, you've made that very clear, Terry, and it's possible that we might cover that on a different podcast, of course, because there is a lot to talk about there. But obviously, I thought it was important just to touch on it there and just make the viewer aware of that. So once again, Terry, thank you very much, and thank you to everyone for listening to this podcast.